Hi, and welcome to today's episode of The Supporting Actor. I'm your host, Adrian Streater, so let's jump right into it. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Supporting Actor. I'm Adrian Streater, your host, and I look forward to you joining this very special edition of The Supporting Actor. I have with me none other than my husband, Douglas Scott Streater, who is also the producer of our podcast. But in today's episode, we wanted to share with you some of the things that we've learned in our journey, not only as parents of a child that was born with a special need, but as a parent who also learned of a condition that is near and dear to our heart. So help me welcome Douglas Scott Streater.
Hello.
Hi, Douglas. How are you?
I'm good. I'm well. Thanks
Well,
for
thank you
asking.
for being on the show.
Absolutely.
So, today's episode is not centered around a child with a special need, but a parent that has a special need and bringing awareness to anyone who is considering having a child or a parent that has already had a child and would like to have more, and understanding their bodies and what their bodies may or may not produce. And so, I have with me my husband, Douglas. And so, Douglas, let's jump right into it. So, do you want to tell our audience a little bit about what your condition is and when did you learn about it?
Yes. So I have a very rare condition that I did not find out about until actually I was having a cardiac event. So I was running. Well, the first time I was actually on my way home from work, and I had just picked up our oldest daughter, Ari. You were actually pregnant with Catherine at the time, and I was bringing Ari up the steps. I mean, I felt fine. I can't recollect. I've thought about that day many times, and I don't recollect feeling anything in my body that seemed awkward. But I just remember carrying her in her car seat up the steps with one arm and my book bag and her little diaper bag, everything on this arm, carrying her up the steps. And when I got to the top of the steps, there was this intense burning like in my chest. And it felt like, honestly, like, when you pull a muscle, that like burning sensation. It was in my chest. And so I dropped it down. I was like, whoa, oh. I thought I'd actually pulled a muscle in my chest, but then the arm started to go numb and I began to sweat. And I was like, okay, this is not good. And you came home actually very
And,
pregnant.
and, and can I interject?
Mhm.
So, we were living in New York at the time, and I had an hour and a half commute to work and from to and from.
Mhm.
And this particular day, I was about 4 months pregnant, and I just wasn't feeling well at all, and I left work early. And so, when I came home, I came up the stairs, and mind y'all, I just sat on a bus in Manhattan or going from Manhattan to Queens, and I had to pee so bad. And so I walked in, and Ari was still strapped in her car seat, and Doug was on the floor. And he said that his chest was hurting. And I said, "Can I go use the restroom?" And he said, "No." And that's when I knew there was a big problem. And so go ahead. Feel free to take it back over here.
Yeah, so we actually got in the car and she drove to the urgent care that was around the corner, and I came in and I told her my chest was hurting. They gave me an EKG right away, and she was like, "Oh my God, you're having a heart attack. You gotta." She called the ambulance, and they came and um, they gave me some pills. They gave me the nitroglycerin pills, which actually open up your arteries and allow make them expand so you can get some blood flow. And it started to feel a little better. little better, but the pain was still there. So they take me to Jamaica Hospital, and I go in because that was the closest like cardiac center to where we were at the time. We were living in Howard Beach, Queens at the time. And so Jamaica Hospital was the closest. And so we went there, and, I just remember sitting in like, I'm too young to have a heart attack. Like, I don't smoke. I don't even drink like that. I don't party. I go to sleep on time. I don't eat crazy things. I don't do a lot of eating out at like fast food joints. What's happening here? And the doctor came in and he said, uh, you have a condition this where the arteries around your heart are bigger than normal.
Wait,
And
did they tell you that in that moment?
yes, he did. He did.
So are you? And I'm asking because I'm genuinely. This is the first time I'm hearing this. So wait, in that moment, did they? I thought they took you to the OR first.
Well, it took me to the OR. This was like right before Dr. Lasik went in and put the stent in.
Okay.
Like he noticed when he looked at after they put the probe in me,
yeah,
and they could see they did the it's not the X-ray, it's the I forgot what it is with
echocardiogram.
Echocardiogram. Thank you, my love. With the contrast, they could see my arteries around my heart, and he said they're bigger than normal, but this one seems to be blocked, and I could see that it was like a clear line on it where all of the other arteries branched out like a tree limb, and you can see the different little limbs on them. Yeah. This one looked like it was an abrupt cutoff. And he said, that's the one we're going to put a stent in. He said, but these other arteries are a lot larger than normal. Now, mind you, I didn't have a lot of plaque buildup in my arteries at the time. I think the one they were looking at, which was actually blocked, was 30% blocked or something like that, which is, they said people walk around and live with 30% blockage, pretty much their whole life, and nothing happens as far as that's concerned. So that was what I was told at the time. And so you put the stent in, and
I'll interrupt again. Sorry. While all this was happening, I'm pregnant. I'm sitting in traffic because this happened. Now we're close to around 5:00 New York time, and I'm not there. I don't know any of this is happening. And by the time I got to the hospital, because I had a toddler, because Ari wasn't even 2 yet.
No, she wasn't. She was still in her car seat. She was being transported in her car seat. So it wasn't even like she could get up and unloosen herself and walk like she could.
No. So because I had a toddler and I was pregnant, by the time I got to the hospital, they would not let me see you. I couldn't go back there because I had Ari with me, and I was also pregnant. And so I did not know your condition for a very long time while you were going through what you were going through. But go ahead, continue. I wanted to add that in.
I think one of the most challenging things about that process is being, a guy who wasn't doing a lot of crazy things as far as eating and drinking and partying and all of this. Wasn't a guy who did that. It was pretty much what my wife likes to call me, a square sometimes, because I don't get a lot of joy out of, the foolish things. So why is this happening to me? And that was it. And being confronted with death for the first time in my life, that's a tough thing. And I think the one of the most dangerous things about it is the mental aspect of it. Like every pain you feel after that point brings you to this moment of like, okay, is this it? Am I about to die? Is this the last time? And it's just like a constant thing with that really challenges your psyche, because your body goes as your mind goes. So if your mind starts to think, well, this is it, then your body is going to say, hey, let's start shutting stuff down, And so that was a really tough thing. But
can I let me interrupt you, Douglas, because
it's just like regular life, huh?
Welcome to the podcast. So, one of the things that our podcast does is bring awareness for our parents who are listening. And I know that you are a parent of two beautiful, beautiful children.
Absolutely.
And because of your condition, we had to, and still do to this day, had to and have to take some yearly precautions with our daughters now to have them see their cardiologist to see if they develop any symptoms or anything like what you had.
Right.
Did this rare disease that you have, does it have or does it run in your family? And if so, would you have done things differently as a father, or not even a father, just a person who wanted to have children? Would you have thought about having genetic testing done?
Well, I think that the challenge, and this is what I was going into. The challenge I faced was one of the most enlightening things about that process is I was getting calls from my family members, and all through my life, every time I was asked by a doctor or a physician when I was in for a checkup or anything like that, they asked, "Is there heart disease in your family?" And I said no, because I didn't know. No one ever spoke about, like, oh, grandmother so and so died of a heart attack, or Aunt Chrissy died of a heart attack, or nobody mentioned that. It was just like, oh, she died, we got to go to the funeral as a kid. So there's none of that like medical history really shared. So I always said no to that. But when I was in the hospital recovering from the stent, I get calls from family who are saying, oh yeah,
First time
you know the first episode,
hospital bit. Yes. Okay.
first cardiac episode, I was getting calls from lots of family members who were just clarifying and saying, well, I've had two heart attacks, and your grandmother so and so did this, and uncle so and so died of a heart attack, and it was just like overwhelming to me because I felt betrayed in a sense because
Wow.
I am a person, and my wife knows this, and it probably gets on your nerves quite a bit. I'd rather attack something the moment we see it and take care of it and put it in a place where we understand what it is and what it can't become because we handled it early. And I feel like if I would have had this information, I would have been seeing a cardiologist
Yeah.
my entire life, and I would have avoided this. So that thing that I discovered about that, I pass that on to my daughters. My daughters are they've seen cardiologists, to check on their hearts, doing EKGs, also doing echocardiograms, just looking at their heart, seeing if there's any sort of defect, a change. And this is a constant thing they're going to have in their life because I've set the precedent with my lovely wife, of course, that we're going to continue to look into these things because it snuck up on me.
Yeah.
And one of the most terrifying things the doctor said wasn't Dr. Lasik. It was one of the hospital doctors on call. He said, coronary artery ectasia, I'm going to tell you, a lot of times who finds out about it is the coroner.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's something that, I never had any heart issues up until that point. I had never had like chest pain or anything like that to that degree. Um, and it
Well,
was,
I
it
want
was
to take I want
complete.
to take a step back from that because I remember one time when we were dating and you were having some chest pains. I don't know if you remember this or not. And we took the train into Manhattan and you went to the hospital there and they said nothing was wrong with you. And that was the first inkling, um,
That
because
was that was
that
a year. That was like a
before.
year, 2 years before
But
that.
I think you also had, after I started doing research, um, we talked about symptoms. And one of the symptoms that you did have prior to was a few nights before this first episode, you were sweating so bad. I don't know if you remember, you were sweating so bad in your sleep that our sheets were wet and we had to get up and change the sheets because the bed was just absolutely drenched. And that's a sign, that's a telltale sign that your body is struggling for some reason or another. So if and not all night sweats mean you're going to have a heart attack.
Now,
Uh,
it is a symptom.
but it is a symptom. Were there
Right.
any other symptoms? I know you said you didn't see anything coming up to that point when you were carrying Ari up the stairs, and in New York. But looking back, what other symptoms? Because you also had a second episode. You had a second heart attack, correct?
Right, correct. But the symptoms are tricky because some of the symptoms are symptoms that you have, like night sweats, chest pain, indigestion, um, shortness of breath. All of these could be small symptoms that you have that seem kind of normal symptoms, not associated with heart disease. If you have any of those symptoms, I would recommend seeing a cardiologist and a specialist, because what does it hurt you to find out if you have cardiovascular disease or heart disease of some kind? Or if you don't, finding out you don't is just as powerful as finding out if you do. So I would recommend, if you have any of those symptoms, pain in the jaw is another one that happens, stiffness in your neck, pain under your underarm, particularly on your left side, is predominantly associated with your heart. But because of the pain that radiates from the heart, you can feel it in your stomach. You can feel it on your right side. All of those things could be symptoms. The most important thing I would say, though, is talk to your family. Talk to
Yeah.
your family. If you've had anybody in your family tree who's had heart disease of any kind, it makes you susceptible genetically to possibly having some form of heart disease. So it's better to know than not to know,
Right.
because this completely snuck up on me. And by the grace of God, I'm still here. I could have died twice because I actually had two episodes. And the second one, we changed our lifestyle as a result of it. We moved to South Carolina, moved from New York to South
After the
Carolina
second one.
after the second one.
Right.
And I met the most wonderful cardiologist in America, in my standpoint, Dr. Ming Tran, Coastal Cardiology, Charleston, South Carolina. Big shout out to him. Just an all around great guy. I was moving back to Charleston, not even sure in my mind if I was going to live the next 6 months. You know, if I was going to have an episode and be done and be out. And I'm looking at my wife and with two little girls, and the fear of, just leaving them was just constant. It was like a cloud just following me around. And that day we went in to see Dr. Tran, he just kind of like came in like a breeze and blew all of those clouds away. He was like, "Listen, you're gonna have a normal life. You're just gonna have to be on warfarin for the rest of your life." Yeah, well, and I looked at him and was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, that's it. I look at your angiogram. Yeah, you're just gonna have to be on warfarin for the rest of your life. You're gonna, have to exercise and, eat right, but that's it. And I was like, I'm gonna have a normal life. You're gonna have a normal life.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that, sorry to cut you off, but one of the things that I felt was beneficial about Dr. Tran, was when he said that, I saw a shift in you, um, because for a year and a half, 2 years, we were living in a sense of fear, and we both had our own PTSD. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
every time you coughed, or if you held your chest, or not only being parents to a newborn and a toddler, not only was I waking up in the middle of the night looking at them, are they breathing? But I was waking up in the middle of the night looking at you, is he breathing?
Mhm.
And so I think also, can you speak to how we ended up in therapy, because we both had our own stressors of the fear of him not being here, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And how did therapy help you in the sense of, I'm going to be okay and I have a life to live? Can you speak to that?
Yes, I definitely can. I think, sometimes we have to get out of our minds about things. Our minds are the most powerful thing on the planet. Your thought process, what are you doing with your mind, is a very profound. I think that's a Curtis Mayfield song. What are you doing with your mind? Um, but sometimes you can get so caught up in your mind about things that you know the answer to resolve your situation, but it takes somebody else really saying that to you. And we saw what's Mindy's what is Mindy's last name?
I can't remember.
Mindy, I would love to shout you out now, but I can't remember your last name. I apologize. But she counseled me, and I told her about the fear that I have about, is this my last breath? Is this, my last day with? And she said, you can't live with that on you. She said, are you taking your medication? I said, yes. So are you watching what you eat? Yes. Are you exercising? Yes. Well, then, Doug, live your life. The doctors have everything else.
Hmm.
Let that be on them. You've got to live your life. You got your daughter, your wife, your daughters, your wife. You got them to take care of. Live your life. And it,
Hmm.
once again, one of those moments where it's like somebody opened up a door to a stuffy room, and it just cleared out, and it gave me that mindset of, all right, listen, maybe I'm going about this wrong. Maybe I have to get out of my head and stop allowing myself to think like that, because your mind is amazing, and it works. It can work for you, or it can work against you. Just determines, like, what are you thinking about?
Mm.
Are you thinking about how to get better? How you going how you going to do this? How I'm going to move forward? Or are you thinking about the past things that were detrimental and how it could happen again? And
Hmm.
that's, that destroys your peace, that destroys your sleep. You can't rest, you can't sleep, you can't get anything accomplished because you're constantly, pining over the negative aspects of things. So that Mindy counseling, and there's a great group that you can reach out to. It's a national organization called Mended Hearts.
Yes.
And they're in every city, or they have one in a city nearby. You can speak to someone who is recovering from a cardiac event, or someone who has recovered and is, outliving their lives and went through what you did, and they can have conversation, and they just really want to talk to you, and they want you to come to, there's usually meetings as well. um, and they just want to talk to you, just want to be there, support you. They talk to you, and when you realize that you're not alone, and you're not the first one going through this, that's also very refreshing. That's also very enlightening and inspiring, because if you believe one person can do it, then it's easier for you to say, well, I can do it too. But when it's all, new frontier, that you feel like you're Lewis and Clark out there in the wilderness, that can be challenging. So Mended Hearts is a great organization that I would say anybody who's dealing with cardiovascular disease or heart disease of any kind, I would definitely recommend reaching out to Mended Hearts.
Well, thank you, Douglas. One last question before we let our audience go, because again, I think it's important for parents or people who are thinking about parents. I know on one of our previous episodes with Jordan and Malcolm Glenn, and they talked about their son who was born with a very rare heart disease, how they went through, and I mentioned it a moment ago, genetic testing. And I
Mhm.
know genetic testing is very expensive if it's not needed, but I think it's also important for people to understand where they are in terms of their process and their thoughts around having children.
Mhm.
Um, Before we let you go, you mentioned Mended Hearts. Are there any other organizations that you support that you feel would be beneficial to our audience to know about. I can tell you from my perspective, one of the cool things I support, which makes it you support, the American Heart Association.
Mhm.
We give, financially, but then there are other ways. Are there any other organizations that you support that you can share with our audience?
Well, like you just mentioned, American Heart Association. Also, I think that one thing that's a little more beneficial on a local level is, and I found remember we found out that Dr. Tran goes and speaks with like a group tied to the hospital, which is Roper St. Francis down in Charleston. A lot of times you can speak to your cardiologist there and ask them about local organizations that they get together. Now, there's no that specific name may change because of the locality of it, but there are organizations that are meeting. There are small groups that are meeting. There are people meeting in office spaces, once a month, who you can just go talk to. There's a network out there, and it's not really that hard to find. Mended Hearts is a big national organization, so that's how you can get started. But what you'll start to see is that you'll speak with someone from Mended Hearts, and they'll tell you, oh, well, there's someone else closer to you who's
Mm.
with Mended Hearts, and it kind of works that way. So Mended Hearts is kind of the umbrella that I would say start with, but always use your cardiologist that you're seeing as a resource, um, and ask what's happening locally to support you. Okay, and I definitely wanted to drop some crazy, heart disease and coronary artery disease like facts really quickly. Okay, just really
Absolutely.
quick.
Yeah, go for it.
Coronary artery disease affects about 18.2 million Americans, ages 20 and older. Okay. And in 2017, it killed 366,000 people. Now, a lot of times it has been spoken that heart disease is higher amongst the African American community and certain ethnic groups. However, 23.7% of all deaths of white and Caucasian people uh, are from coronary artery disease.
Wow.
In African Americans, it's 23.5. It's slightly lower, but still very significant. So that equates to about 202 0.8 deaths per 100,000, um, compared to 274.5 deaths per 100,000 of white males. So white people. I'm sorry, not white people. So this is something that has impacted everyone in some way, because somebody who died of heart disease of some kind. We all know someone. So this is the thing that's silent. It's called the silent killer because you don't even, sometimes you don't have any symptoms. You're asymptomatic,
And
and
women
it shows up happening.
oftentimes And women oftentimes, the symptoms that you described earlier are quite different than men. And so I think it's just important that if you are the partner to someone or you know that it runs in your family, that you do go and see a cardiologist. But more importantly, if you have children, that your children also see a cardiologist. Um, One of the before we wrap up, I did want to thank Douglas, but I wanted to share with our audience as well that the name of our podcast, The Supporting Actor, has a double meaning. So, the supporting actor through my husband's journey, he is an actor. He has been in off Broadway shows in New York and has toured literally the world. Between he and I, we've been on every continent except for Antarctica.
I
Um,
don't think we're going there either. I don't
yeah, I
think
don't think we're gonna make that one,
we're
but
gonna make that one. But
he is an actor, and so I have been his supporting actor on his journey, but I've also, more importantly, been Ari Elizabeth's supporting actor on her journey. And so the name of our podcast has a double meaning for our family. It
Mhm.
may not have a double meaning for yours, but we wanted to pay homage to my husband and what he has gone through being a father, and also supporting our community of parents who are supporting their bright and shining stars. So, Douglas, we appreciate you and we thank you. And we know that there's something big for you, because God wouldn't have kept you around for
Yes.
this long to share your story and to be a resource to so many others. So, I love you and I
I
thank
love
you.
I love you too. And one last thing to
Sure.
anyone who has seen this podcast who has had a cardiac episode or had a heart issue, I want you to understand that you are also a resource.
Yes.
You are also a lifeline that can help others. So don't be afraid to share your story. Don't be afraid to speak to someone about your condition.
That's right.
You may save more lives than you think.
That's right.
Okay, because I'm a firm believer that you if you didn't die going through something,
Mm,
then you went through that for a reason to help others. Okay, so don't be afraid to share your story and speak out as much as you can. You never know who you can help. If you can save one person by telling your story, I mean, that's worth more than its weight in gold. So I encourage you to speak out about your experiences.
Well, thank you so much, Douglas. I appreciate you. And now it is time for us to bid you farewell. Thank you so much again, Douglas Scott Streeter, for joining today's podcast. If you or a loved one or a family member is suffering from, or know someone who is suffering from heart disease, feel free to check out our links that we have below as resources. We thank you all for today's episode in joining us, and we hope that you would like, share, and subscribe to the Supporting Actors podcast. Take care. Bye.